did you grow up?
Till I was 6 years old, we lived out on Adderville Pike,
Okay.
about 3 miles out of town.
Okay.
Then we moved to town so I could go to school,
Oh, okay.
and I went to Main Street School.
Okay.
That's where the center is now, the old Main Street School.
Really?
It was,
Is
I
it this?
remember every room and every teacher.
So was it the same building?
Yeah. No, well, the old Main Street School was torn down.
Oh,
I'll put a
okay.
picture on my site
Okay.
of it.
Okay.
Interesting place.
That is
My mother
really
went
cool.
there.
Okay. Okay. Well, that is really
My
cool.
father went there.
Okay. That is really cool. That is really cool. Well, I went to a high school that, a lot of the people in my dad, I guess, probably went there at some point, but he had an Indian motorcycle, and he would drive himself
here
to
in town
Mayfield.
had one.
Yep. And he would drive himself to Mayfield because he wanted to have access to a better education. And so dad was just super smart, and he wanted to have, more options. So he drove himself up to Mayfield because he just didn't think he had as good of options coming out of the little counties. We went to Lowe's, and but yeah. So isn't that interesting? Well, what are we going to talk about today? Again,
That reminded me of a story.
oh, funny.
Back in the early 1900s, there was a store on the north side of the square, and it had sort of like an Ace Hardware, had a little bit of everything.
Right.
So the man there was trying to figure out what he could do to increase his business. Now, Springfield wasn't very big at all then, and so he bought an Indian motorcycle, and it came to him in a box. He had to put it together, and there was no gas stations, so he had to order a gallon of gas through the drugstroom.
Oh my
gosh! So he
gosh.
got the gallon of gas, he got the box with the motorcycle, and so they call him Mr. Will, and he, of course, he got it all ready on purpose to be driven on Saturday morning. Everybody came to town on Saturday, and so he gets it out.
Marketing.
He cranks it, he puts the gas in, he cranks it, and he gets on it, and he starts riding around the square. And it was just gravel then; wasn't paved anything, and gravel and dirt. And he was riding around the square. Of course, it made a lot of noise. It scared the horses, and people started gathering around watching Mr. Will ride his motorcycle around. And he said, "Well, I'm going to deliver when people buy stuff from me instead of walking down to their house," which city limits was at Garner Street then.
Yeah.
Instead of walking down, I'll deliver it with a basket on the front of his motorcycle. I have a picture of him standing with it. And so he's riding around, and just about all the crowd that was going to be there was all around there watching him. And this putter, and two-cycle engine. And they finally said, "Mr. Will, stop so we can look at it." Well, he just ignored them, kept on going around the courthouse. And finally his wife said, "Will, stop." He said, "I don't know how to stop it. I'm going to have to run out of gas." So he ran out of gas and then stopped it. He didn't know how the thing would stop. But
I remember you telling me that story, but I did not realize it was an Indian motorcycle.
yeah.
That's cool. Those things. My daddy, he was so afraid. He was one of those people, he'd do all kinds of things like that, but he didn't want us doing it because he was afraid we'd get hurt.
Yeah.
And so he sold that thing. And I know my brother to this day is like, I can't believe Daddy sold that Indian motorcycle he had.
20
Daddy, my brother would have loved to have had that, and my nephews and all that. My
20
boys
years
would love
ago, there was 4 of us from here
Yeah.
went to Sturgis, South Dakota on motorcycles.
it. Did you?
2005.
Man.
And we went twice, actually, 2 years. And that was an experience, but I thought, I've never had a wreck, but I probably will have one, so I'll stop right now.
I'm telling you.
I sold it.
Motorcycles are something I've
really
always
enjoyed it.
cautioned people. I said, you got to assume nobody sees you on that. Just like if you're riding a bike,
right.
you
Nobody's
got to
looking.
assume no one sees you because there's blind spots everywhere on those things. As a traffic reporter, the most horrific accidents I ever covered, I've covered. I had to cover a lot of really bad ones, but motorcycle wrecks, man, just whew. Anyway,
I ran across one in South Dakota. It
Yeah,
was way out in the
I bet.
middle of nowhere. Cell phones didn't work. There was
Yeah.
about 15 motorcycles that hit.
man.
They were going in opposite directions. One hit another, which like a bowling
boom,
pins.
boom, 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 yeah.
And it was pretty bad. Somebody had to drive 20 or 30 miles to even get to a phone.
Yeah.
And finally a helicopter came in, and
Wow.
it was something. I don't know if they made it or not, but I was right. I came up on it right after it happened.
People don't realize the blessing of our cell phones when it comes to emergencies. We were hit by a drunk driver when I was in fourth grade, going down to Columbus Park, and bad, terrible accident. And I mean, you couldn't get a hold of anybody. And by the time they put my mother, who was very seriously injured, in our friend's car, the Leonards put Mama in that car, and drove her, emergency to the hospital. Yeah. And but it was a long time before the ambulances and things got there to help the people who actually hit us. And it was just, people don't understand how the communications, how it's just increased and helped us in so many ways. But we're talking about history. Bill and I will get off topic, and he brought something in to talk about. And here it is, 10 after, and we do have a couple of sponsors we got to talk about this morning. We're going to save the UPS store for tomorrow, but I've got Bernard Farms we're going to be talking about, and always talking about Barry and Rebecca Richards. But we'll save that for just a minute and go ahead. And if you're just joining us, welcome to it. This is 1100 WSGI. I'm U-Turn LaVern. This is one street over. This is Bill Jones. Second Monday. The second Monday is going to be a history show now, is what we're doing. And super excited about this because we talk about history a lot with Bill. Now, Bill was in here Friday and we were talking about faith issues, and I've got some stuff for you on what we were talking about too. Yeah. But
I was going to ask you about
Yeah. I found something, but we'll talk about that off mic. But nonetheless, we want to talk about history today, and a lot of people are super excited about this. My husband is. He just loves it. He says, about time y'all did that. I'm like, why did you suggest it?
I think there'll be more and more people watching
I think so
this
too.
as we go.
But
I want to say this. I would like for people, if you're on Facebook, to write a comment, ask a question. If I don't know it, I'll look it up.
Sure.
Or research it or something. But,
right.
I can only do so much.
Right. I got you.
And sometimes people go a little far out and wanting me to research this, that, and other when I say, you can do this.
Yes, you can.
I don't want to search everybody,
Yeah.
I can tell you how to do it. But
That's
anyway,
funny.
What I'd like to talk about, well, at the beginning of Springfield, it was started in 1819. It was called Springfield, but there's nothing here. It was incorporated then, but there was nothing but log houses, because there were no brick houses here. You sort of have to put yourself in that place where it was. And the first jail was a log house. They didn't even have a jailer. They just locked the door and went to bed and came back, hope they were still there. But you have to think that everybody, you think now, what's everybody have at their house? They have a car. Back then, they may have not had a horse, but most people had a horse or a mule or something, and they had a pile of wood in their front yard, and that's how they heated. And they had a outhouse in the backyard. So that was essential things that they had. They were not brick houses; they were log houses, and just wasn't that many people here. So you get thinking about that and think, that was pretty. They didn't have any phones,
of course not,
or their heat was wood and no air conditioning, and it was sort of hard, and people sort of wandered in and out of town, and I'm wondering, one of the first councilmen they had, or what it was called back then, was a man with the same name as Davy Crockett's brother. Now, David Crockett's brother lived over in Williamson County, and it's documented. But I'm just wondering if it wasn't him. It's the same name, same time period, and everything. So that's just something somebody could look up if they want to and research that. I don't know. I haven't gone.
So his name is listed as a councilman here, and you wonder if it is the same name, since that's very interesting.
I don't know.
What do you recall the name? I know you don't have your notes with you.
I don't have it in front of me.
That's people will ask me something.
Crockett was his last name.
Well, of course, and you just like you were asking me about the palm branches and stuff, and I'm like, well, I don't have my notes with me, and you learn these things and you'll share it, and people want the specifics, and you're like, I got to go dig it back up because I don't have it in front of me, but I just know I've looked at it.
I got file cabinets and stuff. When somebody asked me, I said, I'm gonna have to go through my file cabinets. That's gonna take me a while. I don't know. You can go to the museum and archives and ask, and they probably will know right off. But
Well,
my mind won't hold all this stuff.
well, we could probably with a quick Google Davy Crockett's brother
Probably, yeah.
and
Yeah.
find that kind of stuff. And
Somebody
that's
type it on Facebook and see.
do you research the Google much, or do you do it all through books?
Google you can depend on mostly, but you have to be careful. It may not be
Mhm.
true, especially if you get an AI answers, artificial
Well,
intelligence answers. Sometimes it's off.
when you and I were talking about this, the meaning of the palm branches and stuff, I did a couple of quick Google searches and found things very quickly. But then to go and find the hard reference
Right.
is
That's
is a
what I look
little
for.
different, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing is,
I got a lot of books.
yeah, and
And
so
Bible stuff, we're getting off track
yeah,
here.
we are just a
The
little
Bible
bit.
stuff, it's better to get the oldest books you can find
Mm.
on Bible customs.
Mm.
I've got some written in 1800.
Oh wow, cool.
And that's more accurate than something 100 years later.
Yeah.
Mine's 1850s, 1860s.
I think we're kind of coming back around to accuracy, though, depending on who your source is, because some have an
That's
agenda
exactly
that
right.
they're pushing. You have to look at agendas. You have to look at because it's like the victor writes the history books. I mean that's what people don't realize. Woodrow Wilson was he was a bigot, and so I mean he had a lot to do with the history books that were written around his time. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of Black history was written out
Yeah.
of history books, why we don't know a lot. That's why we have Black History Months because,
Yeah.
I mean, he premiered what was that? Oh, the movie about the Klan. I can't remember the name of Birth of a Nation, I think is what it was called. He premiered that in the White House and resegregated stuff. It was not good. But anyway, I digress. Bill, what are we talking about today?
Now, back
the
again,
beginning
think
of
about
Springfield.
old days and how things were.
Yep.
Think about road signs.
Yeah.
Nobody talked about that. Because back then, there was no road signs in the 1800s, hardly. There was some in the 1800s, but they were usually posts with a name on it. Oh, they didn't have numbers and things like that, road numbers.
Mhm.
And the unusual thing was, like, I read some stuff about Highway 76 from here to White House, and the state didn't come and repair the roads. It's people who lived on that road, were whatever's in front of their house, they took care of.
Mhm.
And the next neighbor, he would take care of that section of road. And that's how they took care of the roads. And then I'm got thinking about back to Bible stuff. When they had fields, they worked in the fields, they'd pick up rocks and throw them out in the road. Road was just a dirt road, So then if some dignitary was coming, they would send somebody out to pick up rocks and throw them back over in the ditch, But anyway, that was part of the thing here in the county. People would clear the rocks out of the road and the ruts and the ditches because if it rained, it got ruts and the wagons got hung in the ruts and the horses and all that. So they would be responsible going out there with a hoe or something, and smoothing their portion of the road down. And there's several historical things I've read of people doing that. So you get thinking about it and you think, well, we think of today with our GPSs and the road names and all that. Back then, the big change it came to road signs was the automobile, because when the automobile showed up in the early 1900s here, there were car clubs formed, and there were different car clubs, and a car club would go out and put up signs for their car club members to know where to go.
Mhm.
The other car club would come along and they'd put up a sign. So you might have 2 or 3 signs at one intersection showing you Nashville 15 miles or Goodlettsville so many miles. And they would be, you see them in the old Westerns, they'll have an arrow pointed and,
Yeah.
they would try to fool somebody by turning the sign around that time. That's what it looked like back then. It was just a post with maybe a sign on it that a car club put up. And back then, if you wanted to go somewhere, you knew where such and such lived. Everybody knew him because Springfield was small,
Yeah.
back in the 1800s. And everybody said, well, somebody coming to town, well, where is Frank Trimble or something? Well, they say, you go down as far as you can see twice and turn right. About where the old oak tree used to be. And
Right.
everybody knew that in
Yeah.
town. So back then they started adding names to the roads. When they started naming the roads, Frank Jones lives on that road or a lane, so they would name
Jones
the road
Road.
after him. So today we have road names that we don't know who the people are. We don't know them.
Uh-huh.
And one example of that is a road out south of town on South Main Street called Lahr Road, Lahr.
Mhm.
Lahr Road turns off there and goes all the way over to Highway 49. And back when I was a kid, we'd ride our bicycles out there. It was out of town. It wasn't in the city limits. It was right. It was considered 3 miles from town
Mhm.
back then. And there was a lady that lived on that road called Emmetta Lahr, Emmetta. And I remember it was no houses on that road then, and we'd ride our bicycle out there, and she would fuss at us because we were riding down her road.
Oh my.
She didn't want us riding. So I thought she was a big woman. I don't know. She may have not have been, but she looked big to me. But Emmetta Lahr Road, her father was a Lahr, and they've been living there since in the 1800s, and she died around 1960s or something like that. But that road became Emmetta Lahr Road, is what it was called. Then it was changed. I read one thing, it called it Meta, Meadow, Meta Lahr. That wasn't correct. And they would have different spellings because people didn't know later who she was or what it meant. So I remember my dad had Henry and Bell Furniture back in the 60s, and we had a delivery guy, and he had pickup trucks we delivered in, and my dad gave this delivery guy directions, said, go to, out of town on the right, turn on Emmetta Lahr Road. And so he left about 9 o'clock in the morning, didn't come back till, this was on Saturday because I was working there too, didn't come back to about 3 o'clock. And he still had the furniture on the truck. And I asked him, said, well, what happened? He said, Mr. Jones, I went all the way to the other side of Nashville, and I never did find that metal arch over the road.
Oh my goodness.
So then we had to draw maps.
Oh my goodness.
We knew better now. We need to draw a little map on the paper to tell them where to go. There was no GPSs then or anything.
Right.
But roads back then had a name. You go out Barren Plains and you'd see Corbin Road, or you could go different places. And back then you knew who these people were, but now nobody knows them. And that's so interesting to me that, and I noticed when they had a tornado down in Louisiana, I think years ago, people from here went down there to help. And the hurricane, and the hurricane had torn all the road signs down.
Right.
And he said nobody could find anything because they didn't know the roads.
Yeah, they didn't know where anything. Yeah, they didn't know the road names.
Said be sure and have a good GPS because
yeah,
even people who live there
yeah
didn't recognize the roads. They probably Mayfield same way.
Well, oh yeah, Mayfield after the tornado, you didn't really know where you were. It was very disorienting because everything was gone.
So the car clubs made a big difference with our roads, and then we come up to and the road names. We think about that, and that changes constantly. Not quickly, but we see names, and of course, I'm sure people that move here, and there's a lot of people moving in, have no idea what these road names mean. They thought, who is this guy? Well, they ask a neighbor on that road. I don't know. I don't know who that was, but it's somebody lived here a long time ago. Of course, it might have been the only house, and if it was a dirt road, it might change into a lane. They lived off the road on a lane way back in the woods, but that was still named after that person.
The road that I grew up on that ran off the 45 highway, it didn't have a road. I don't recall it having a road sign when I was a little kid, but I can remember when they put a road sign up and it's Baldry Road, and we're like, why's it Baldry Road?
Yeah.
Because, and my parents knew and explained it to me and it was somebody kind of like you said, but I can remember as a kid that sign coming up, and I was like, well, who in the heck is Baldry? I only know Wilsons and Thurstons that live down this way, And then, what you were saying about giving directions, my daddy, you ask him directions and he'd give it old school way. And
Yeah,
he would tell
yeah.
you, and I'm like, Daddy, just tell me where to turn. Don't
Yeah.
tell me what he would give me. Well, you could go this way, or he'd give me 5 different ways to go
Well,
somewhere.
older people, you still hear that.
Yeah,
today. They'll
and
give you
but Daddy
all
would
these
tickle me to pieces. And it's so funny, but that's so interesting that you say that because that's why.
Yeah.
Is because he grew up with that.
Well,
that's so
they had
interesting.
markers.
Yeah.
Like that,
Yeah.
if they surveyed something, they'd use a big rock as a corner or
Yeah.
a big tree. Well, both of them could go away, especially the tree. And so when you look at the old surveyors, if you go up to the courthouse and look at an old plat or something, they would say the old oak tree, and you thought, that's not there. And if they had things like that, or a fence post, and the fence post is gone, or the creek, and the creek may have changed course, So sometimes we have to make our mind think of how it was rather than how it is today.
And not that long ago.
No.
That's what blows my mind.
100 years ago.
I mean, look at how old we are. And I mean, I talk to my kiddos and I'm like, do you understand, just 100 years ago, what the situation was in this country and how incredibly blessed you are?
I was thinking this morning. My grandmother was born in 1876.
Yeah.
Out on Adairsville Highway. And they didn't get electricity in Springfield, put up lights till 1900 or right around there. So everybody had little lanterns and lights in their house, and in town it was not lit up. And when they lit up one of the streets, they called it a white way.
Oh, really?
Because they have all street lights, and they were so proud in the early 1900s when they first put the first street lights in of it, because then they called it a white way because it was white at night and you could see. You think about sidewalks, for instance. Sidewalks in town way back then was just, some were plank and some was dirt.
Yeah.
And if it rained, you got to
mud.
skip one plank to another, and the stores would try to put, something out front of that store, like a plank or something, so the ladies wouldn't get their shoes dirty. But the town wasn't big, it's very small. But the unusual thing about Springfield and Robertson County was the incoming of tobacco. Tobacco made a lot of people very wealthy.
Right. That and the whiskey.
Yeah, and whiskey.
They were big whiskey producers here.
Whiskey, Robertson County whiskey was known the best in the world at one time.
Yeah.
And it was shipped all over the place, especially the Woodard whiskey. I told a story about one of the first county fairs we had was in the city. It was out on I forget the name of the street south of the railroad tracks. And there was a Woodard whiskey display. Of course, there was no lights, no tractors. It was all, wagons and horses, and, had a horse arena that people would perform in, and they'd give them prizes, ribbons and things. So there was a little spot there for the Woodard whiskey display, and people would come by and take samples, of it. There was a real smart guy in Nashville that decided he's going to bring a balloon out. So a hot air balloon. He puts it on the train. Of course, back then, everybody went to Nashville by train, usually. And if they wanted to take an all-day trip, they'd take their horse and buggy and go, but it was a long trip to Nashville, and the roads were rough. So he brought his balloon out and set it up next to the Woodard whiskey display. He tethered the balloon, meaning he had a rope on it.
Right.
And he would offer rides for people. He may have been charging $0.25 or something to get in the basket, and then they'd shoot hot air in there, and it'd go up.
Yeah.
And people could get in the basket. Probably wouldn't go over 100 feet.
If they do that at the Balloon Festival, still you do tethered rides. I mean, that's a big thing. Yeah.
So what happened there? One time, this guy went up in the balloon. And the breeze came along and blew the balloon into a tree.
Easy for you
limb,
to say.
And it dumped the basket. He fell out.
Oh,
of
my
course, it wasn't 100 feet. But by that time, the balloon was, just tree height. So he fell out maybe 15 feet or something, knocked him out. So they didn't know what to do. They ran over and says, let's get him some whiskey. And they go over to the Woodard whiskey display and get a little whiskey and pour it down his throat, and he came to.
I bet.
So it's medicinal. They call the whiskey medicinal.
Goodness.
Whiskey,
That's hysterical.
Anyway, I want to talk about mail. Have you ever thought about that?
The mail delivery and stuff?
just mail.
Hang on. Let me do a break. Let me do a break before we do that. And then
you want me to shut this door?
oh, it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
The reason we shut that door is because I have a very loud voice that carries over into the studio, but I've been letting Bill talk more, so I didn't think it would be as big of a deal. But it's really to protect them across the hall. We have WDBL, which is our Spanish side, and they tend to have they have a devotional in the mornings, and so Ilyu says I'm a little too loud for them sometimes across the hall. But no, anyway, I want to talk about Barry and Rebecca Richards. We're going to start with them today. They are our full-time sponsor. They've been with us from the very beginning, sponsor 5 days a week. We love them so much. And if you need anything to do in real estate, they are the ones to call. If you're looking, the best thing to do, if you're looking for property and you want to reach out to them, you can give them a zip code that you're wanting to live in. And they can research it and they can say, well, we have this house available. We can find something for you. We can keep our eye on that area to say, when something comes available, we will let you know. That's something we've done. We were kind of curious to see if some property will come available at the top of the hill where our property meets. We want some road frontage up at the top of the hill because one of our kids is interested in maybe building up that way one of these days, or so they say. But anyway, so those are the kinds of things you can ask Barry and Rebecca, even if you're not actively interested right now. You can kind of put a little feeler out to make sure that they're keeping an eye on the areas that you're wanting to live in. If you're looking to sell some property, you've got a marketer like Barry that was 17 years a vice president of a media marketing company up in Nashville before he went full-time with real estate. Having a marketer, Bill talking about the motorcycle and the balloon and all, that's just marketing, guys. And marketing now is you got to have a digital aspect to your marketing. You need somebody that can do drone footage, that can do great walkthrough tours, that's great with video and photography. And that is Barry. He's my go-to when I need information at school, helping with my audio and video program. And again, they're just the whole package. Rebecca's one of the first in the area to be a seniors real estate specialist. So if you're older and you're like, I need to downsize, I need to do something different, she understands all the nuances of that. Barry, again, that marketer. He has the brokerage office here in Springfield. She has her agency office up in White House. They've combined those two to bring you Exit Prime Realty, the same company they've been with from the very beginning, but they just brought you a new branch in the tree. And the way you get in touch with them, here's Rebecca's number, 615-504-7425, 615-504-7425, or you can connect with them at sellwithbecky.com, sellwithbecky.com, or buy.robertsoncounty.com. Always let them know U-Turn sent you.
Hi, friends. This is Josh.
Second Monday of the month now, we're going to devote it to history, and we're talking about just imagining what it was like when Springfield first came to existence. I mean, I want to know when the courthouse was built too. We'll touch on that in a little bit, because as I'm in my mind picturing those cabins that would have made up the town, and you said it was in 1819?
Yeah.
1819, because we just had our 100-year
incorporated.
Right. And so you think about what it was like. Of course, eventually
it was named before that, late 1700s.
Okay, but before they actually became incorporated.
Nobody was here.
Okay, and so you think about it's not that long ago, and so what was the mail? I mean, how did they deliver mail? So that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about now.
Okay, let me ask you some questions.
Okay.
When do you think the first stamp ever came in existence?
The first stamp?
Yeah.
Ooh, I mean, maybe about that same time, about 1890.
Well,
I mean,
in the world.
In the world.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I think it kind of morphed, because I think the stamp was always that wax seal was kind of considered, but it wasn't, that wouldn't be, that stamp was a way of saying it's paid for, right? Because you always had the wax seals on letters that would identify where they were coming from. But the stamp
that's later.
Itself, the stamp itself that said, I've paid for this and to be delivered, I don't have any idea, Bill.
Well, it started in England, called a black penny stamp. It was black and had a picture of the Queen on it.
Okay.
1840. That's when the first stamp started. But really, mail started in Egypt, and delivering mail or letters and notes back and forth around. And that was in Bible times, so you wonder
why. Have messengers and things like that.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what they did.
Yeah.
and the messengers were
Well,
paid.
the letters of the Gospels, how they went around,
The
you know.
government, what you'd call government back then in Egypt, they're the ones that started it and started carrying letters around, mainly from kings and people,
Right.
wanting to get the word out. So sometimes back then, when a king would put out an edict, it might be a while before everybody heard about it in the kingdom, especially if it's a big one.
Right.
But anyway, what do you think the first stamp cost here? And let me before you answer that, there was a man that lived here called Cave Johnson.
Okay.
Cave Johnson, if you go out 49 east, 5 minutes out of town, there's a little place on the top of the hill where the road turns left, and some Celts lived there. And that's where Cave Johnson came from, lived out there. And he became the first postmaster general, which was under President James K. Polk, to come up with mail receptacles and the first stamp.
Okay.
So we're famous for that. He's buried over in Clarksville. He
Right.
ended up, during the Civil War, he had to take sides and all that stuff. And he was a lawyer, and he finally resided in Clarksville when he died, and so he's buried over there. And there's a plaque when you go through Clarksville on Main Street there about him there. But he came out with the first stamp. What did it cost?
I mean, a penny? I don't
Nickel.
know. A nickel.
Now that to us
Okay.
about $2.05
That's a
today.
lot. Yeah.
So they were paying $2, in our money back then to mail something, and it was only up to 300 miles
Oh, really?
and a half ounce. And if you wanted to go further, then they had another stamp, which was a dime stamp, and it had
Right.
George Washington's picture on that, and it would go further with a little bit heavier mail. But you just think back then, and they didn't really have post office. I used to be interested in antiques, and still I am a little bit, but you would see these desks, about like this, and they would have little cubby holes on, a cabinet sitting on top. That was a post office back in the late 1800s, maybe in the early 1900s, but that's the way the postmaster that would be hired with the government would do things. He would put letters in there. And I can remember back in the 60s, we can mail a letter to somebody and don't even have to put their address, didn't even know their address. Tom Smith, Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah.
And it would get there, and
would
they would
get
know
there.
where he was, And that was in the 60s. I remember that. And still, I got some envelopes at home, and I see them on for sale on Facebook, not Facebook,
eBay.
eBay.
Yeah.
And that's the way they did it. And I can remember when they required the address. We lived on Connell Street when I was young. And instead of 609 Connell, you could just put Bill Jones, Connell Street,
Right.
and you'd get it. Then when they came out with this rule, then the postmaster would have to bring it back and put it in the post office and say undeliverable because it didn't have an address on it. Then it came to where if, say, somebody put the wrong address instead of 609 and put 607, even though the mail carrier knew who you were and knew the right address, they were required to take it back, send it back.
To get people used
So
to putting
it got
those numbers on
everybody,
there.
But
Okay.
the mail was interesting. And, back then they had post roads. Post road was a main road between big cities that the mail wagon would deliver mail from one city to another. And we hear of post roads, I do anyway, occasionally when you read stuff and thought, what is that? And that was the road, the main road that the mail came on. So they had post roads, and those roads had names. By the way, interstate numbers now, they started out interstate numbers. The even numbers go east and west, and the odd numbers go north and south, like I-65, north and south. I-24 is east and west. Back then, they didn't have numbers. They just had a few names, and that was it. But anyway, mail delivered in wagons from one town to another. And here in Springfield, the post office, so-called post office, was at different locations. Where the Bell Building is now, you know where the Bell Building is?
Yes.
7th Avenue in South Main.
Right.
There used to be a house there, and there was a post office, a lady that took care of the mail there. People in town would go, well, in the county too, would go to that location to get their mail because it wasn't delivered to them, and they didn't have mailboxes. Now this is early 1900s,
It's really not as long ago. Not as long ago as you think.
And
yeah.
People, the wealthier people in town, would pay someone to bring their mail to them. It was tobacco people that were very wealthy and whiskey people. So they had paid somebody to have a courier bring their mail to them every day. Everybody else would maybe come to town once every 2 weeks or something, and they would check,
pick up their mail,
see if they had any mail there. And that's different,
Oh, yeah.
And
now,
so
if we
anyway,
order something and it's not there the next day, we're like, what happened?
there was a big hotel. I say big hotel. It started out one floor, and then they added a second floor later. But it was on the corner, 5th and Main,
Mm-hmm.
where it used to be First National Bank there. Now it's whatever it is, a farm home something. And the post office was there. So they constantly moved it around. And then finally they made a plea to the House of Representatives and the Senate and all that Springfield needed a new post office because they had all this money from tobacco taxes and whiskey taxes going to the U.S. Treasurer. So they said, look, you all need to fund us for a post office. So around 1905, they built the one that the museum is now.
Right.
And it was a beautiful post office and marble floors. I can remember going, because they didn't build the one we have now until 1964.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember it very well, and I'm sure other people do. But
What blows my mind is they went from that majestic building to just
Right,
a little small
it was
post office.
fine-looking building.
Yeah.
In fact, I
So-
remember as you walk in the door, there's a stairway goes up to the left, and I don't remember this, but I was told that it was a Mr. Farmer who would go in up there, and there was a telephone to the government up there. It's a government building. And so he would go and report on suspicious people in World War II that might be German.
Yeah, I knew that you were telling me there were some German families here. He was always like, "Oh, they're doing this," you know, and
they had a rumor
Yeah.
came out that the Germans were going to come in and parachute
parachute
on a
in.
farm over on 431 North. Now, why
Oh,
the
my
Germans would do
goodness.
that, but people come up with all kinds of things. But anyway, the post office, they had a little, I remember a little area up on the ceiling. You could look through there and see it when you were up at the window. And they had spies or people going up there, and they had little slots, and they were watching the employees to make sure they didn't take anything or do anything. So they had somebody, and you go up that stairway to the left, and you could go into that little area. It's not there now; they took it down. But there was little slots. You always wondered, are you looking at me? When you
How
go
funny!
in.
You never knew if you were
Yeah.
being watched, so you
Yeah,
better
so-
not be, pilfering.
Anyway,
Interesting.
so people, the government, it hadn't been that long ago, 100 years, a little over 100 years ago, they decided, hey, open post offices. I've got a list of post offices all over the county. It's just unbelievable. Bob White was the name of one of them. I thought that was funny. Ashburn, Baggett's, Adams Station, Barren Plains,
So
they
they
all
had
had a
post
little
office
post
everywhere.
office. And what it was, I knew a woman one time that worked in the one at Sadlersville, and she just had a desk there, and she was responsible for the mail coming in and people coming to pick it up. And then they began to deliver mail, but people had to put up boxes to do that. And so they would pay for it. Let me back up a minute when we were talking about stamps.
Yeah.
The first stamp that came out, they had a little confusion because if somebody paid for the stamp begin with, that's fine. But if they could also send it and the person receiving would have to pay for it.
Mhm.
Well, they had so much people sending stuff back that didn't
Like,
want it.
I don't want it. I'm not paying that.
They had to change and say,
Yeah.
okay, you got to buy stamps. And of course, they had some glue. They didn't lick them like we have
Right.
today or self stick. They had to stick them on there, and they cut them. The stamps were cut out of a piece of paper. They had a postmaster would have a sheet of paper with stamps printed on there, and they'd take scissors and cut them out, and then take some glue, Elmer's
glue 'em
glue, no,
Yeah.
some kind of glue, and put it on the back, and that's That's how they did it.
I can remember things coming to the house postage due, even in the 60s.
Yeah.
But I can remember mother having to pay for a letter or something, or give some money. Like the postman would come up to the door rather than just leave stuff in the mailbox because there was something with postage due, or maybe it would be something on a letter, and you were to go and pay it, and they'd keep a record if you didn't.
Do you think a lot of education happened in mail because they had magazines?
Right.
And everybody wanted a magazine, but, it was expensive. So sometimes people would get a magazine and share it with other people. And you couldn't buy books locally. You didn't have bookstores. You had to order your books through the mail. And you ordered those from magazines. They didn't have the internet to look at and see. So mail was very important, and people wrote letters back then a lot. Now you don't see letters any. I occasionally, I get emails. Now you hardly get a letter unless it's a Christmas card or a birthday card or something like that. And some of my kin folks will put a narrative in there what they've been doing all year type.
Yeah, they'll put like that.
But
A year in review.
Back then, the letters, when you read them, they're hard to read because their writing wasn't like ours.
It's cursive.
And their words were different and things were different. And when you read the old letters, it's very interesting to me to see how I have some letters that were written back and forth between Cave Johnson, because he is my great uncle, and between him and his kinfolks. And his kinfolks were not educated. Cave was. So it was sort of interesting to see how their misspelling were, how the words they used. That's interesting to me, anyway.
Oh, it is me as well. We found some a diary. There's a diary record that we've been given a copy of people who owned the farm that we're on.
Yeah.
I don't know, probably early 1920s, I think.
I've got
I forget
some
the
diaries
date.
written early.
And it's really
1900s.
interesting. It's very interesting to hear a little bit more about. I fixate. I love sitting out at our place because there was a cabin there when we moved. I mean, we tried our best to save it. We spent a lot of money trying to save it, and it was full of termites. We had to bring it down. But I see the daffodils out in the front yard. We talked about your grandmother's daffodils at the schoolhouse, and I think about the people who've walked that land before we are, that will do this, and people who will be there after us that will wonder about us. Let me do a break, and we're talking with Bill Jones. This is our History Monday, second Monday of the month. Join us for history. And I mean, when Bill pops in here, you just never know what's going to happen. We're going to be intentional about talking about history on the second Monday of the month, and we want you to be a part of it. Now, somebody that I'm super excited that they are now a part of the show is I love Bernard Farms Custom Cuts and Market. I love Julie and Steve. They're just hysterical. They're so cute. I just love their sweet little family. I love the fact, I told Julie, I said, I love the fact you're like my farm heroes. And what I mean by that is, having grown up on a farm and watched how it's changed and how hard it is to be a farm family anymore, you have to really come up with these diversified ideas. And that's, happened up at the farm I grew up on in Kentucky. They had to diversify and do different things. Well, Julie and Steve, they decided to open up their market to, they were selling at the farmer's market the meat they raised, and then they would send it off to be processed. Well, now they're doing custom cuts right there. I'm looking at their meat case right now online. You can go Bernard Farms Custom Cuts and Market. Man, what a beautiful meat case. Absolutely gorgeous. And every week, I messaged her last night. I said, what are you doing this week? Because last week they did beef. This week they're cutting pork on Tuesday, she said. And she put up a post yesterday about how busy their Sunday was because, we all like to take a Sabbath, but man, if you're a farmer, you got to farm when it's not raining. And so they were out doing some planting. They got to church and then went out to work the ground. Tanner and Tate's planting some sweet corn, popcorn, and some cotton. Fun stuff. I mean, they've loaded up some hogs to harvest, this week. And so just all kinds of fun stuff. But you can follow them on social media, Bernard Farms Custom Cuts and Market, and find out all these cool things that's going on. And again, Steve's going to be planting some field corn this week if the weather will hold. I know how that goes. It's probably the same things happening up in Western Kentucky with my brother. But now the big news is they've got their Easter event coming up this weekend, Saturday, we want to get you out there. They're going to decorate cupcakes with the Easter Bunny. You can, of course, that's being sponsored by the Pleasant Hill Baptist Church in Orlando. They're going to have between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m., 9 and 11. But they're going to have all kinds of fun things for the kids. They're going to have they're going to have vendors out there that they've invited. So they're going to have just, great quality vendors for you to come and be a part of. But 9 to 11, of course, you can get some pictures made with the Easter Bunny. And they're Bernard Farms Custom Custom Market. They're at 7536 Clay Gregory Road in Orlando. Fun place to go, just beautiful. Love what they've done with the place. But again, my farming heroes, I love what they've done. And it is just a beautiful thing, and you're going to want to be a part of it. So get out there, and you can join them for lunch. You can come out and grab some breakfast. They're out there open right now. As a matter of fact, they open at 7 a.m. They're 7 to 4, except on Sunday they're there 1 to 4. 7 to 4, Monday through Saturday. Sunday they're from 1 to 4, that you can go by there and just see what all they have. But again, cutting pork on Tuesday this week, and just all kinds of fun things. You can come get some plants from them. Just anything and everything. Go by and see them. You're going to fall in love with them. And be sure when you do stop by and talk to them that you be sure and let them know that you heard about it here on 1100 WSGI. Tell them you turned sent you.
Go back and talk about mail again.
Okay.
How did they deliver mail?
Okay.
As I said, they were called post roads,
Right.
mail wagons. They use steamers, boats, to go down the Mississippi or up river to carry mail. And then we've all heard of the Pony Express. Pony Express only existed about 18 months.
Oh, really? You hear so much about it, you just assume it was around a long time.
One rider would cover 75 to 100 miles.
Wow.
But he would stop every 12 to 15 miles and change horses. And then he would go on, and the next rider would take it from there. And it took about 10 days to get it from here to West Coast. So that, they were constantly trying to figure out ways to deliver the mail. And that was one way they did it. But as I said, stagecoaches. Stagecoaches, we all are familiar with when we see Westerns, but not only did they carry passengers, but they carried mail. They were one of them. And the government bought stagecoaches and owned them and ran them. And I remember I remember when I read something, but there was a stagecoach line that came through Robinson County, north of Springfield, through Barren Plains, and there's a road, Barren Plains Road, I guess they call it, goes over on 431 North, and there's a big filling station on the corner there now. But just opposite it, there was a little store there when I was a kid, and before that, it had been another place there, but wasn't, it was more crude than this building was, I remember. And that was a stagecoach line, and they would stop there, let the mail off, and bring it into town. But instead of going to Springfield and back, it's quicker to just go through there. So we had stagecoaches that dropped mail off. We had steamers, boats that bring it down the river. They had, of course, the Pony Express. And it just gradually, and this is not long ago. That's
what's mind blowing.
Impresses me. Yeah. It's just not that far away.
Yeah.
And I think I base a lot of my thinking about my grandmother's birthday in 1876. And I thought, what the things she saw happen in her life. She lived to be 97. The things that she saw in her lifetime, just amazing.
Yeah, I think the same thing with my grandparents as well. The changes, they were born right, around the 1900s, and I forget the exact, date, but the same thing, the innovation of cars and airplanes and all those things. But, and you're talking about the mail being delivered with stagecoach, and we'd watch the Westerns and those kinds of things, and it's always like going to rob the stagecoach. Well, that was wise because the things that were being transported via stagecoach.
Well, a lot of our knowledge comes from watching Westerns. We see that, and most of it's pretty accurate, so it's interesting to relate to some of that stuff. And then I just don't relate to some people that are fairly young today because I don't realize they don't know that.
They don't have the things that they don't do.
Yeah.
I mean, I was talking to one of the kids the other day about if they listen to the radio and has never you know, I
What do you think the date would be
tell
that
me.
mail started in Tennessee, delivering mail?
In Tennessee?
Yeah.
uh, I think it's prior to 1900.
1897.
Okay, not
So
much.
you-
See,
no,
I
not
know it
much.
pretty close.
That's a state. That's
Okay,
it
as
didn't
a
start here
state.
then, but
Wow.
as a state, it started then. But just think that's
1897.
a
100
little over 100 years ago, they started
100
delivering mail.
It's getting to be close to
What would
130.
we do if we had
It's
to go back?
Mm-hmm.
Back then, horses was prevalent. Everybody had a horse or a mule.
Mm-hmm.
When cars came along, only wealthy people had cars.
Right.
Now today, how is it? Everybody's got a
everybody's
car.
got a car.
And the wealthy people have horses.
Isn't that? I had never thought about that, Bill.
Yeah, isn't that it?
That's hysterical. I had not even thought about that.
And
Huh.
I have a picture of my grandfather standing beside his horse. He loved his
Yeah.
horse, and people were horse people. Like we have dog people today, they were horse people.
That's
back then.
hysterical.
And
We were having that conversation with, again, a family
back
at the
north
track
of-
meet the other
north of
day.
Springfield, if you
Yeah.
go past North Springfield Baptist Church, go at the top of the hill, there used to be a little arena there, and they would have contests of how horses would walk and prance, and
Yeah.
people who had horses, wealthier, they would have a contest there, and it'd be part of the fair most of the time, but they would go there to do it. And that doesn't exist anymore, and hardly anybody even knows that. But it's interesting how the fair has moved around town, and
Yeah.
some other time we'll talk about fairs. And Tiny Tim came, and I got to see him at our county fair.
You have told
we'll talk
me,
about
but I
that.
think it's something that we can revisit because
Yeah.
so many people haven't heard these stories.
Right.
You and I've talked enough. I've heard
Yeah.
a lot of these stories, but we want to archive them on this history show and make sure. But Tiny Tim, if you don't remember Tiny Tim, he was bizarre.
Tiptoe through the tulips.
Bizarre person, but he was around in the 60s. when I was
ukulele.
oh yeah.
Married, what was the
do.
lady she married? Miss somebody, I forget. But
I remember, but
on
I
television,
yeah.
Johnny Carson, I remember.
Oh, I bet Paul Rainey's going to know. Tiny Tim and
Oh, shoot, yeah, he would know.
yeah, he was. He's always chiming in on it. When we were trying to guess the cost of the stamp, he and I both were on the same line. We were both like a penny, but it was a nickel.
Yeah.
So we missed it. But what was the name of What was the name of Tiny Tim's girlfriend? Of course, we could quick Google.
Petula, somebody
I can't
like
remember.
That, not Petula, but
Yeah,
Penny or
yeah.
Miss Vicky. That's what it was.
Was it Miss Vicky?
yeah.
Okay,
Miss
Miss
Vicky.
Vicky. Okay.
They divorced later.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that. Is anything else? We're down to just the last few minutes. Anything else you want to cover? I'm sure you only touched the hem of the garment.
Last
of what
thing
you
we
had.
mentioned and get to, the first stamp was a nickel, and then just a few years later, they went to a penny. After they sort of organized it and all.
Oh, really?
Went to a penny stamp.
So it
and
went
had,
down. Oh, so it
Yeah.
went from being a nickel to a penny once they got a little more efficient.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So-
okay, okay,
They were a penny for a good while.
okay. How much are they now? I don't even know.
They're going to have another increase in July, and they've planned for another increase every year after. But around it's going to the 78 cents or something like that
Oh, really?
in July.
I mean, and you
But
think
you think about it, if it's 75 or 78 cents now.
yeah,
They were paying a nickel then, which was worth $2.
Yeah.
It'd be like us paying $2 for a stamp now.
yeah,
So you just have to take everything in consideration of
yeah,
how things were.
right.
And, there's, I got thinking the other day, how did people get information? We have newspapers, radio,
Mhm.
TV, internet. How did they get the information then? Mostly churches.
Oh, yeah.
Traveling preachers would go from one church to another, and he would bring information, especially about the Civil War. So people started taking sides on the Civil War according to what the churches believed, the particular church. So
Interesting.
that had a lot to do with Civil War, who's going to take what side. And the preacher not only preached the gospel, but he gave the news too, because he was an itinerant preacher. And that's how they got a lot of news. People went to church, and it was very important to them to go to church and be a member of a church, because if you weren't, if you didn't go regularly, you get excommunicated. And that happened down at Adams a lot. I had a great grandmother that got excommunicated because she didn't go enough.
Oh my goodness.
But church was really important, and you did not want to be on the outs of the church, because then you'd get shunned in the community. If you weren't a member of the church and didn't go to some regularity, then you were considered a bad
A
person.
heathen.
A heathen.
A heathen. A heathen. Well, the Black Robe Regiment was given credit for the stirring up the country for the Revolutionary War. The preachers were given credit. The Black Robe Regiment was a thing.
I went to college up at Swanee, University of the South. That was started by Episcopalian ministers involved in the Revolutionary War, and that college started from that.
Wow.
And went on.
It's fascinating stuff. It's good stuff, guys.
If you have any questions, put it on Facebook.
Send it to me.
If you'd like to come and talk about something, I'm sure that would be okay too.
Oh, yeah. Well, Danny actually is very interested in getting involved with the, coming in because he loves talking history too.
I'm just starting something I think a lot of people like.
I think so too. It's fascinating stuff.
Next month there'll be different topics.
Yeah. And just like you were talking about I've got the secretary that was in my mother's living room that has those little cubby holes, like you were talking about the mail.
Yeah,
and I was like, I wonder what that was used for originally. But it's a piece I've hung on to. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's one of those things. But now I really want to hang on to it because of what you're saying.
The desk with a bunch of little square holes.
That's what it's got. You pull the top down, and there's these little slots, and it's like, interesting. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for our first installment of History Mondays, the second Mondays of the month for history. If you've got questions, like Bill said, send them to us. You can private message me. You can send an email to Bill. But give them your email real quick. We always do that. Tell them how to get in touch with you.
Well, Facebook.
Yeah,
Bill
Facebook.
Jones,
You can,
Facebook.
Yeah, you can
I'll
find him on
answer
Facebook.
questions there, or on U-Turn LaVern.
There you go. Hit us up here. And tomorrow we'll be talking with Dr. Danny Weeks, our director of schools, after they have the school board meeting tonight. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for joining us. This is 1100 WSGI. God bless. Have a wonderful day.
The Lord has gone away to prepare a mansion in glory for me. Someday by